Lucas Aerospace is a company which no longer exists, but it used to be. It used to be an arms technology manufacturer working on things like electronics and aircraft, mainly military aircraft. It had factories in Birmingham and a factory. In the literature it says Willesden, but actually it was Park Royal if you count that as Willesden. And what happened was in 1976 they started to introduce a programme of redundancies. Now the workforce resisted this. They had an organisation called a Combine within Lucas Aerospace, which included all the unions. It was a multi-union organisation. And together this Combine came up with a proposal that instead of redundancies, what they wanted to do was use their skills, which were quite considerable, because there were people like design engineers, computer engineers, highly skilled electronic engineers, and also other people like clerical workers involved. But they wanted to use their skills not to make weaponry anymore. They thought we could continue to be employed, but we could do something socially useful rather than make weaponry. So that was their proposal, and they proposed an alternative corporate plan. After the film, after you've seen the film, we can maybe look at how far that got, which probably most of you know. It got to the sort of beginning stage, and then that was it. But it was a fantastic idea, and that's why people are still, commemorating it. Why, through the new Lucas plan, this gentleman Steve Sprung has made a film about it, because it is regarded as a landmark in terms of workers trying to assert control over production and also to provide an alternative to arms production. I think that's all I'll say at this stage. I was actually, that's the first time I've seen that, although I've been involved in trying to edit down the 3-hour version into that, but I'm not responsible for that edit, and I think it was very good. And there are actually things in there I didn't know about. I mean, the thing that blew my mind was an electric van running around Coventry in 1970. I mean, that's astonishing. But, and also the other thing I think that was shown in the film is to what extent, I don't think climate change was quite on the national agenda in 1976 the way it is now, nothing like it. But clearly a lot of the dual-use electric motors, which are in, you walk out on the street and they're in cars now, and wind turbines, they were anticipating. They were clever men. They knew what was going on. They may not have construed it as climate change, but they realised that there were energy-efficient technologies that they could be making instead of what they were doing. Some of you, I've passed around this handout, and there's a few more here if anybody hasn't got one. But and it gives you more detail. There's stuff about Mike Cooley, who's probably the most famous member of the Combine, who went on to write a couple of books and be an academic. He wrote, his most famous book is called Architect or B, and as it said there, the plan itself spawned several other sort of research projects. But although it had, you could see at the beginning, it had the support of Tony Benn, and it had the sympathetic noises made about it by some elements of the labour movement. But ultimately, they couldn't put it into reality, and so it just became sort of research projects. Now, in 2016, in order to come out, I mean, as I said at the beginning, it was a sort of groundbreaking, a landmark thing in British labour history. And to commemorate it in 2016, there was a conference in Birmingham bringing together Greens, peace campaigners, some of the original members of the Combine, people from the left, and so on. And out of that conference, there still exists now 4 working groups. And as it says in the last point of this, details what they are. There's an arms conversion working group, that's fairly self-explanatory. Robotics and automation. Just transition, I think probably, I don't know if everybody's familiar with the term, but just transition in sort of current parlance. I actually heard somebody using it in the context of Brexit, but the phrase usually means trying to ensure that when old industries are closed down, for instance, as is happening right now with the Ford engine plant in Bridgend and the steelworks. I can't remember where the steelworks are closing down, but they are. I think probably Scunthorpe. Yeah. When things like that happen, instead of having a closure and forcing people out onto the dole, wrecking a local economy, you offer workers like the people with the skills, equivalent skills to the people you had at Lucas, a chance to work in socially useful production. And there's a pamphlet there, which you may be able to, a few copies here, but you can get it from the Campaign Against Climate Change. 1 million climate jobs produced by the Campaign Against Climate Change. The title's self-explanatory, that you could have 1 million climate jobs instead of, mass redundancies. Okay, so I think really essentially that's all I've got to say. The film and the members of the original Lucas plan said more than I can, I think. So I'd like to hope I'm going to stimulate a bit of discussion about it.
Thanks, Pete. Well, let's have some discussion and questions if anyone's got any.
Could you tell us what happened? The factory closed down, presumably.
Yeah.
What was the outcome?
Well, basically, Lucas. That's the irony of it all. Lucas Aerospace, in spite of saying, "Oh, we know the competitor," if they say Lucas Aerospace doesn't exist anymore, it was presumably eaten up by somebody like Lockheed or somebody like that. It's vanished, and probably a lot of the work has totally gone out of this country. And actually, ironically, that's also happened. It's only now British manufacturers have started to manufacture dual-use engines. It's not always happening in this country. And the other thing that happened, of course, was that since the Lucas plan, one of the major wind turbine blade manufacturers on the Isle of Wight, I can't remember, the name began with a V, but I can't remember what it was.
Vesta, wasn't it?
Vestas or something.
Yes,
I actually campaigned. I was outside the factory campaigning against the closure, and I can't remember what it was called. But that went, and now there are wind turbines coming up all over the place, and big arrays being built. But they're mostly manufactured by Danish companies, with some manufacturing moved into actually taking place in Scotland, but it's mostly owned by Danish companies. But yeah, I mean, Lucas had vanished. Factories are closed, as far as I know. There might be somebody else is using them somewhere now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. At 81, I'm probably the oldest person in this room at the moment.
No.
So I remember a slightly different world. Yeah. 1976, I was working for one of several oil exploration companies in the North Sea, and the effort there was, of course, to make ourselves self-sufficient in oil, which at the time was a perfectly acceptable thing to use. Prior to that, I worked in the aviation industry, and that was largely to do with weaponry and ejector seats and things like that. Again, I thought I was doing the right thing there, because we were in a rather difficult situation with the Eastern powers, and and we did know about wind turbines and things like that, but of course they weren't viable at the time. So when you've got, oil at, sometimes it's at $10 a barrel, and it'd shoot up to 140 when the Arabs played up. So, and I'm surprised you didn't know about the electric vehicles. There was one of the big stores in London used to drive around with a nice green painted electric.
Yeah, Harris used to have
Harris,
it.
of course.
The only people who used to have it.
Didn't the milk floats used to be
Yeah,
electric?
Yeah, they did,
Yeah,
yes.
my father-in-law was a milkman, he used to come up Buxton Crescent. Electric. So,
But for some reason, nobody, well, I mean, you've given the reason that oil was so
I mean,
cheap.
all these things like heat pumps and all that sort of stuff, you know, that was all, we all knew about that, you know, we discussed it. And in fact, some of the people I worked with, there's one guy in particular, he moved out to Houston, Texas, and started his own energy company there. And it's like 50-50 oil production from the Gulf and wind turbine power. And I was always trying to get him to, instead of these bloody great propellers going round, to use the Fleckner turbine system. You aware of that one?
Yeah, well, I've seen it, I think I know.
Differential air pressure that causes it to, it's
Yeah.
just a cylinder.
Yeah, I think I've seen it.
But, just an observation.
Yeah, thanks. George?
I'm coming from a slightly different angle. Tied up with first of all, tied up with Lucas Aerospace Company. They were an armaments company, heavily involved in armaments. And the thing that fuels the arms industry is the oil industry. And what we face today is we've got to try and break this equation with the hydrocarbon fuels and the production of arms, which is still going on, in spite of the fact that the rest of the smokestack industries have gone. The traditional steel industry, elements of the car industry, other engineering enterprises.
We've got rid of all the useful stuff and ended
But-
up with the rubbish.
That is the equation that we've got to deal with, as well as thinking about and talking about alternative production. We've got to break the equation with the supply of hydrocarbon fuels, because that is what is fueling the arms industry and also causing havoc with the environment. In the days of the Lucas Aerospace situation, where hardly anybody spoke about climate change, but now that it has become, but I just want you to say that.
No, I think that's an important point, because too often we're sort of told that, socially aware green consumers will apply pressure onto business to make their products, more green, more sustainable, and so on. And on one level, there's an element of that. Although if you look at most major companies, their environmental audit, their fair trade aspect is usually run from their PR department, which kind of tells you it's basically a greenwash job. It's not really something that they're committed to in terms of the bottom line. Although, again, there have been organisations, Amnesty, for example, have pushed very hard that companies should begin to start auditing themselves according to an environmentally sustainable bottom line. But this is an uphill slog, and the simple reason is, not only for the connections you mentioned, but when you look at these issues like built-in obsolescence, the need actually not just to consume more environmentally useful products, but actually to consume a whole lot less, to not buy so much junk, Furbies, Tamagotchis, and so forth, all the useful things we need. So this really hits, this whole sort of issue hits very hard at the heart of the profit motive. The two are not compatible, and when you link it to the armaments industry and the pressure for conflict over scant resources, you can see where that's coming from. So any advance on 81? Sarah?
Yeah, 82. What I want to say, I think one of the most inspiring things about this, and there are several, but one that I think is very important for us as Brent Stop the War at the time when people are becoming more and more aware of the issues of climate change is how enmeshed those two are. How, for one thing, war, I think, must be the most destructive activity known to mankind in terms of destruction of the environment, of the threat to the planet and the planet's future. And although they weren't talking in terms of climate change, they were talking in terms of sustainability, and all the things that they're talking about link opposition to war with and with a true democracy. You know, you've got workers' control over what they're trying to get workers' control over what they want to produce, and also to run down the drive towards war. So it's really important. And one of the things, I think, where we stand today, where we've seen these magnificent moves for climate justice, very often people in movements like Extinction Rebellion are quite hostile to approaches to, for instance, the trade union movement, because we've seen very defensive reactions from some of the unions to ending nuclear power, to ending this kind of production. So pushing the possibility of this and the strength of workers and the amount of knowledge that working class people have got through their training and through their skills. And actually, this doesn't show it, but there's quite a lot of militancy in that. There was, my husband used to work at CAV in Acton, which was also a Lucas factory, and the shop stewards' quarterly meetings for that part of London. 2,000 engineering shop stewards meeting 4 times a year, mass meetings, enormous amount of. And I'll just quickly tell one story, because there were threats of redundancy and cutbacks at Central Middlesex Hospital he was telling me. I didn't know about this at the time. But a group of shop stewards from the Wilston and Park Royal factories got together, marched down to the hospital. I think they marched into a board meeting. I might be embroidering the story slightly. And said, you bring in those cuts, we bring the factories out on strike. The cuts didn't take place. And that's the kind of knowledge and intelligence and that the shop stewards combine at Lucas were able to show, the knowledge and the confidence in their skills and abilities to come up with things that, yes, a lot of them do exist now, but they were really groundbreaking and forward-looking.
The technology's there, the skill mix of the population in Scunthorpe is there. It's already there. It's already there in Port Talbot in Wales. And, you know, this is the direction that I think that the future government has got to look at. Thank you.
Thank you.
And it's also been a very good discussion. It's one of the best meetings I've been to Stop the War for a long time.
Yeah,